In addition to the core functionality or the core technologies in Windows Server, there are also optional roles that you can install in Windows Server. So some of those roles, I won't cover all of them here, but some of those roles we'll discuss. A server role is basically a major function or service that the server can perform, and we can also add functions to some of these main roles, which we'll talk about. So server features provide functions that enhance support on an installed role or add standalone functionality to the server. So a server can be configured for a single role or several roles. So you don't have to pick just one for your server. You can have one, many, or perhaps even all servers in a small business, for example. In a small business, you might have an essential server running with just about everything running on it. They might need a lot of these different services that I'm going to talk about. The first one that your book discusses is Active Directory, some of the Active Directory services or roles within Active Directory. The first one is certificate services, which provide services for creating, issuing, and managing digital certificates. I don't want to talk too much about what a digital certificate is and how they work. We'll save that for our Active Directory course. Active Directory Domain Services, or ADDS, installs the Active Directory server and turns the server into a domain controller. So you would install that server. We talked about Active Directory under core technologies as well. I would say that Active Directory is probably one of the most common, one of the things that you really can't replace with any other type of server operating system. So it's kind of one of the killer apps, you could say, for Microsoft Windows Server. It's one of the things I think that has made Microsoft Windows Server so popular in the corporate environment for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about later on, things like group policy and so forth. So there's some other Active Directory related roles that you'll see, like Federation Services, the Lightweight Directory Services, which allows you to connect to things outside the Microsoft ecosystem with Active Directory, Active Directory Rights Management Services, and so forth. One of the other roles that you can install is DHCP, which provides IP addresses and the DNS addresses. It basically automatically configures the network interface on servers. I think most of you are probably familiar with DHCP. When you turn a computer on or plug a computer into a network, it allows you to automatically configure that device. For example, most of you at home, when you get a new device and bring it home and turn it on and join it to your network, put in your Wi-Fi password or plug it into to a port on your router, you don't have to configure anything, it just works. And DHCP is the protocol that allows that to happen. Microsoft Windows Server has a DHCP server that you can use in the Microsoft ecosystem. That said, there are other services that can provide DHCP outside the Microsoft ecosystem, which many organizations use. And likewise, DNS is what handles the domain name system or DNS management within your network. Again, there are services available for DNS outside the Microsoft ecosystem, but generally it's recommended if you have a domain controller that you use Microsoft's DNS server. So this is a role that you can install. You don't have to use Active Directory to use DNS, but it is recommended, again, if you use Active Directory, that you use DNS within Microsoft Windows. There's also file and storage services, which allows you to ensure high availability and reliability for shared storage. Again, this is one of those things that's also available through other means, through other vendors, through other platforms, but Microsoft has a platform for this as well. We're going to talk later on about storage spaces, so I'll discuss that under new features. Hyper-V is a role that you can install. We talked about Hyper-V before, but Hyper-V is the hypervisor for Microsoft. So it's Microsoft's hypervisor. It's an analog to something like VMware or VirtualBox, and there are some other ones out there. But that is a role that you can install. So once you install the Hyper-V role, then you can install virtual machines in Microsoft. That's not to say that you couldn't install, say, VMware and install VMs. You certainly could do that. But what's a little bit different about Hyper-V is it's a role within Microsoft Windows Server. It's not software that you install as a package or a software installation. It's part of the roles within Microsoft Windows. So that's how we set up virtual machines and set up our private cloud, which we talked about earlier. There's the network policy and access services. Some of those that you'll see are network policy server, health registration authority, host credential authorization protocol, and so forth. Again, we'll talk about these a little bit more detail later on. And then print and document services, which enables administrators to centralize and manage access to network printers. And it also allows you to install things like LPD, which is basically for compatibility with Unix and Linux systems. which by the way is a nice part of Windows 2012. I think really beginning in 2008 and then continuing in 2012 and 2016, rather than trying to shun the Linux and Unix environments. I think Microsoft has accepted the fact that this is a core part of most of our infrastructures. There are things that Linux and Unix does very well. There are certain software applications and services that you have to use Linux and Unix for with certain vendors. So it's important for them to work with those operating systems, and LPD is one of those roles that you can install that allows you to use the line printing daemon. And that's basically, the line printing daemon is basically a standard, pretty standard Unix daemon for printing. And the thing is, if you have servers on your Windows network, and you have Unix-based or Linux-based applications that run a business, for example, there's probably a need for using those Windows shared printers to print, and LPD makes that much easier. So it gives you the ability to do that. Remote access is another service. This allows users to VPN to a server or to set up virtual private networking. You can also use a new feature called direct access, which enables the users to connect securely through any internet connection, and it's a little bit more user-friendly than VPN connections, so it's another option. And again, there are other services available to do that. It's not something that's only available in Microsoft, but these are some of the roles that you could use within Microsoft. And finally, for roles that we'll talk about here, and there are other roles. I don't know why your text doesn't choose to cover them here, but there's other roles such as web servers and things like that, and application development and so forth and so on. But Windows deployment is another one, and this works again very closely with Active Directory and domain controllers. But this allows you to install and remotely configure Windows workstations. So the workstation version of the Windows operating system. In 2012, by default, it's Windows 8.1, but you can certainly do Windows 10 as well. I don't even think you can install Windows 8.1 anymore. I think you pretty much have to go to Windows 10. So it provides all the tools that you need to deploy Windows in an enterprise network on a large scale, basically. So that just allows you to deploy, and there are services and roles for deploying software as well. But I'm not going to talk about that yet. We'll cover that in much more detail in our course on Active Directory. So there's a lot of features and functionality in Active Directory that allow us to deploy applications and control how we run applications within the network. So finally, in our last slide deck, we're going to talk about some of the new features that are available in Windows 2012 Server.